Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Sainato with Real Progressives. I'm a journalist with the New York Observer, Counterpunch, The Hill, and Truth Out. Tonight, I have a recurring guest, attorney Jared Beck, who I'm sure everyone that's watching this has been following the DNC fraud lawsuit against the Democratic National Committee and Wasserman Schultz for rigging the primaries. Against Bernie Sanders supporters. They just had a hearing yesterday. Mr. Beck, could you just start off by telling us just a little bit about what went down yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a hearing on the defendants' motion to dismiss the complaint, which is the second motion to dismiss that they filed in the course of the litigation thus far. And the motion was fully briefed, and essentially what the defendants were doing was asserting various theories about why the case should be thrown out of court at this very early stage and why we shouldn't even have a trial on any of the claims in the case and any of the issues. So the court scheduled a hearing on the motion, and the hearing was held yesterday in Fort Lauderdale in front of Judge Zlock, and the hearing was lasted for approximately 3.5 hours. It took up the entire afternoon. It was very substantive, very detailed. There was a very serious and intense discussion from both sides as to the various issues raised by the defendants in their motion. The judge came prepared with a very, very long list of very pointed and detailed questions to both sides, and gave both sides an opportunity to weigh in on the questions as well as to present general arguments about the case in opening and closing statements. And then at the conclusion of the hearing, the judge did not issue a ruling from the bench, but he indicated that he is going to issue a written ruling within the next period of time that will contain his legal reasoning on the issues and his formal ruling on the defendant's motion.
And could you tell us a little bit about, based on that ruling, what possible avenues the lawsuit could go in from there? Right.
So the main issues that were raised by the defendant's motion are what we call in legal practice issues of standing. And standing is essentially a plaintiff's right to come into court and litigate claims against the defendant. And in order for that to happen, certain elements have to be satisfied. And so the defendants were presenting as what I would say is the major part of their motion, an argument that we as plaintiffs don't have standing to proceed towards trial. And so what they're asking the court to do is throw out the case with prejudice so that we don't even get to have a trial on the claims, which are essentially that the defendants, the DNC and Wasserman Schultz, engaged in fraudulent and other torturous conduct in rigging the primaries against Bernie Sanders and in favor of Hillary Clinton.
I know yesterday you were talking a little bit about the media blackout to this lawsuit. You filed it originally in June, and you've had court proceedings up until October, and then there's been that 6-month deliberation. In your opinion, why have media? Well, first, can you tell us what media outlets have been paying attention to this, and why do you think the majority of media outlets, whether from mainstream to I don't think I've seen even local Miami, Fort Lauderdale outlets covered the lawsuit. So why do you think that is?
That's absolutely correct. We've received zero coverage from local outlets. Essentially zero coverage from the mainstream media, with the exception of one very small article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal during the DNC's convention in Philadelphia. Other than that, we've had no mainstream coverage whatsoever. I think what is going on here is a repeat of the media blackout that faced Bernie Sanders during his campaign that we all know about and lived through. I think we're going through that again. I think so. That's part of what's going on is that, most of the mainstream media is so invested in the Democratic Party. And we've seen how that works in the WikiLeaks emails itself. I mean, they have relationships with each other that are very, very powerful. And in fact, that's one of the main thrusts of our case is that the DNC rigged the primaries by leveraging those media relationships very strongly in favor of Hillary Clinton, creating narratives throughout the campaign that hurt Bernie Sanders and helped Hillary Clinton. And that was one of the points we made to the court yesterday. So I think it's a repeat of the blackout that we all experienced with Bernie Sanders. At the same time, I also think that it happens to be a lot of things going on in the world right now, especially in the international realm. There's all kinds of things happening with the Trump administration. Some of it that I think, the media just blows out of proportion every day because that's what the mainstream media has been doing ever since Trump took office. And then, of course, I think there are some legitimate issues that they are focusing on. So given, the tendency to have a blackout to begin with, all the stuff that's going on, it doesn't surprise me that our lawsuit has received absolutely no coverage in the mainstream media. Although, of course, it's very, very disappointing and frustrating because this, and I can tell you this based on yesterday's hearing, this is the only governmental forum that I'm aware of where serious issues relating to the corruption in our political system are actually being discussed and looked at in a serious way. That discussion is happening nowhere else in our government. I know it's happening among the people. I know it's happening on social media every day in massive quantities because I see that and I'm part of it. But as far as people in government actually paying attention, I'm not aware of anywhere else where that's happening other than in this case. So I think it's a very, very important discussion that's happening right now in this lawsuit, and it deserves attention.
So, based on, I know you told me before off screen that you don't have a time frame for when Judge Slock would issue that written order, but given that we do get the answer, we're hoping where he dismisses the motion to dismiss. How would you engage the lawsuit from there? What would be the processes that you have to go through, and what could Sanders supporters expect to be paying attention to? Right.
So if we get the result we're hoping for, which is that the judge obviously denies their notion, and we're very hopeful, and I think this hearing gave us a lot of confidence that we're going to hopefully see an order like that. Or of course, I can't speculate what's going to be in the order because, the judge didn't issue a ruling at the hearing itself. And I want to make that very clear. But he asked a lot of questions and we got to see what the DNC's main arguments are. But if we get the result that we're hoping for, then the next stage is discovery. And discovery means that not only do we get to go into the documents and other materials that are in the defendant's possession. And we already have a lot of very damaging stuff that's come out into the public domain already, but we'll get to go even further into that process and find out what else may be in their possession. Not only that, but we're going to be able to conduct depositions, which means basically that we'll be able to put all the principal players under oath, ask them questions, and they'll have to answer those questions under penalty of perjury. So it's a very, very powerful process, and it's a very important part of the litigation process, and that will be the next step if indeed, as we're hoping, the judge denies the defendant's motion to dismiss.
And at that point, I can't imagine mainstream media being able to ignore, if Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Donna Brazile has to go and testify in front of court over this lawsuit, which would be, as you will know, as you know, as any Bernie Sanders supporter knows, that we really haven't had any sort of vindication, any sort of reform, any sort of hope since the Democratic primaries, and especially after Clinton blew the election, to give us hope that progressives either have a place within the Democratic primary, have a victory to look forward to. So this is in a way a vindication of that. So we're all hoping and waiting on that ruling. So I've been lucky enough to be able to cover this since June,
right,
and really keep people updated and keep people just focused. I know that like you said, there's a lot of different things going on, but I think it's important to keep holding the Democratic Party accountable, and this is one of the ways where we can not relitigate the primary as people who criticize Bernie Sanders supporters say, but really address what was wrong in the Democratic primaries, not just from a lot of the Clinton partisans, they focus on the WikiLeaks emails, but even before then, there's a ton of stuff. And even I, will come across research and I'll be like, oh, I forgot about that.
Right.
So,
there's an enormous amount of evidence that's already in the public domain. I mean, the complaint before the court doesn't even cite WikiLeaks because it was drafted on the basis of Guccifer 2.0 before the actual convention took place. So, and I advised the court, and by the way, we've ordered the transcript from that hearing, and we're going to be making it publicly available to everybody on our website as soon as we get it. But I think, and I would encourage people, if they have the time, to read the transcript themselves and go through it, because there were a lot of very, very interesting comments that were made throughout the hearing. In my mind, a lot of the most interesting stuff came out of the DNC's lawyers' mouths, and really indicate the nature of what we're up against in terms of trying to make our political system function again as a democracy, which is what I think we're trying to do in some ways through this lawsuit, which is to put our own democracy on trial.
And people can view those documents on, I think, jampack.org is the website. And, you guys have get really transparent about this case and posted every document the lawsuit on there, and a couple, and from the DNC lawyers who also happen to be the Clinton campaign's lawyers, Mark Elias, the general counsel for both, and they've shown and exhibited the same disdain for Sanders supporters in their arguments that they've done, throughout the primaries and since the election loss. Just to recap a few, they've claimed that neutrality is a political promise, and they tried to argue that Sanders supporters knew that the primaries were rigged. So, there's based on that argument, they don't think there's grounds for a lawsuit, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Right. I think I want to respond to something you just said there, because I think it's something that's very important and came up at the hearing yesterday in the DNC's comments. Two things. Number one, you just mentioned the disdain for the Sanders supporters. I think it's starting to go even beyond specifically disdain for Sanders supporters. We're starting to see disdain for the entire democratic process. And that became very clear at one point in the hearing, where the DNC's lawyer was arguing to the court and actually said on the record in open court as an officer of the court that it is the DNC's position that they could actually sit in a room smoking cigars like they did in the old days. This is what the lawyer said. I'm paraphrasing him, but these are his words. And there would be no legal accountability if they picked the candidates in that way, in sort of a back room, smoke-filled room kind of way, like the old days. There would be no legal accountability. That's their position. They believe they are entitled to do that in spite of what their charter says, specifically about having to conduct the primary in a fair and even-handed way. And the judge actually referenced that specific part of the charter throughout the hearing more than one occasion. So he's very familiar with that provision of the charter. The second thing I wanted to say in response to what you had said, because you mentioned the specific terms impartial and even-handed, and you correctly mentioned that the DNC has taken the position in their papers that that's a political promise. Well, at the hearing, I think they doubled down on that even more, and the lawyer actually said, and I couldn't believe this, my mouth was practically hanging open as he was saying this, but he said that the words impartial and even-handed actually don't have enough meaning in their view so that the court could actually adjudicate the dispute, because who knows what impartial and even-handed really means. He actually said that to a federal judge. And to me, that's not just an assault on the charter, what the charter actually states, and common sense, quite frankly, but he's actually talking to a federal judge who does that every day as part of his job, which is to say that's the whole basis for our judiciary, which is that judges decide cases in an impartial and even-handed way. That's what they do every day. So to say to a federal judge that those words don't have sufficient meaning to make this a viable dispute that could be adjudicated at trial, to me is just mind-boggling. And I was blown away that the DNC's lawyer would say that in open court as an officer of the court, as, you know, relaying what the DNC's official position on that is. But I can tell you that's what he said, and you don't even have to rely on me. We're going to get the transcript out there, and everybody can look and see it, and it will be reflected in the transcript. So I would encourage everyone to read that when it comes out.
And I know this has happened, you know, decades and decades ago with smaller parties that have lost their charter. They've had it revoked. I mean, I know that seems very intangible, but what would the Democratic Party have to do for that charter to be revoked? I mean, is that even, you know, theoretically, what would that have to entail?
I mean, do they have the ability to adopt a new charter? Is that the question?
Well, the question is they have the DNC charter now. You know, right. What would they have to do to have that, you know, revoked, basically? Here's
my position on that, and I said this to the court yesterday. I think the reason that the Democratic Party has that in their charter is because we have, for all intents and purposes, we all know this, we have a two-party democracy in this country, and democratic government is what we're guaranteed under the Constitution. So I don't think you have a democratic government under any stretch of the definition of democratic unless the primaries are being conducted in an impartial and even-handed manner, because that's how you democratically select candidates. So I believe that, you know, by virtue of the development of this country's political system over time, the Democratic Party, and specifically the DNC, is really the custodian of critical aspects of this country's democratic institutions. And in order to execute its role and responsibility, it has to act in an even-handed and impartial manner with respect to the candidates vying for the nomination in a presidential contest. I don't think they can exist as one of the two major political parties in a two-party democratic system without acting in a fair and impartial manner. So I don't think they could say it any other way in their charter and exist as a viable Democratic Party. That's my view.
And, you know, one of the most important reasons why, you know, I've been covering this, and a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters have been focused on this, and, you know, still continue discussing the primaries, is because we don't want to see this happen again in 2020, or we don't want to see it continue happening, you know, in smaller scale, you know, congressional races or you know, Senate races where the establishment picks their own candidate, and whether it's a progressive or a grassroots candidate kind of gets subverted. So moving forward and looking at those elections, what in hindsight, what could future campaigns do that are grassroots to prepare themselves or protect themselves legally from having the Democratic Party machine subvert their campaign?
That's a great question. I think that's what this lawsuit is all about, is establishing legal precedent so that this doesn't happen in the future. So it's our intention to litigate this case all the way through trial on a class-wide basis and get a judgment in an amount sufficient to compensate all of the class members for the harm that they have suffered by virtue of the Democratic National Committee's conduct. So that's the way our legal system works, and that's the way our legal system holds people accountable. You get a judgment against them, and then when they're slapped with a judgment, which in this case would be enormous given the quantity of donations to Bernie Sanders, we're talking well over $200 million going to the Sanders campaign alone, spread over 7 million individual donations, which are staggering numbers. And we're not even talking about punitive damages at this point, or treble damages, which I believe we would have the right to under the facts as we know them. That's a staggering consequence. The consequence has to fit the crime, so to speak, so that the crime doesn't happen again. So my hope is that through this lawsuit we can establish the type of precedent that's needed in order to ensure that going forward, this kind of thing never happens again.
All right. Well, before we go, is Elizabeth around, Jared?
Yes, she is. I can go get her if you'd like. I will say that unfortunately, she wasn't at the hearing yesterday because she had to be in Los Angeles on other business. But I'm sure she'd be interested in answering any questions you might have about this case or anything else.
So yeah, I just wanted to ask her a couple questions now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me run and get her, and she'll be right in. Okay.
Okay. No problem.
All right.
In the meantime, I want to discuss a few of the big things I think, the big evidence of the primaries being rigged that have really been overlooked, through the primaries and, retrospectively. Well, here's Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Oh, hi. How's it going? Wait.
Good. Okay, so unfortunately you weren't at the hearing yesterday because you were at another hearing, I believe, against the Kardashians. So can you just briefly tell us how that went?
Yeah, I was actually, where is the camera? I was actually in California since last week for about 5 days on 2 cases. One is a lawsuit against the Mayo Clinic for fraud. And the other one is the lawsuit against the Kardashians for trademark infringement. So I was unable to attend the DNC hearing, which was a big regret, but I wasn't, it was said and these depositions had been set before, so I was in California. But I got the news and I will be ordering the transcript for everyone.
Okay, and is there anything you'd like to add from what Jared was saying before, or anything you'd like people to know about the lawsuit, or whatever decision the judge might hand down?
I wasn't there, so I really couldn't. I don't feel comfortable saying, but I'm going to get the transcript, and so everybody can read it and draw your own conclusions. But I know you wanted to ask me about the deposition. So on Monday, I was taking the deposition of Ms. Kris Jenner in the trademark case. And as the lawsuit itself, you can read up about it. It's a trademark case. It's set for trial this year. But what was interesting was in between her deposition testimony, Ms. Jenner was talking about how she has off-duty LAPD guarding her family. And she was showing us this message she got from this officer, which says, the officer had basically sent her a text message saying, suspicious individual found in front of, one of the apartments. And the message went on to say this individual is loitering outside the front door. He has brought a bouquet of flowers, what seems to be a bag of cookies, and a full-length mirror on which he wrote something like, I don't know, like "You Go Girl" or something. We will monitor the situation and let you know if there's any further suspicious activity to report, And then in this same conversation, the court reporter is talking about how when she was living alone in Los Angeles, she was protecting herself by having knives near her bed, And the great disparity, it struck me, the great disparity of police protection that is available to these two women in Los Angeles, because one person has a lot more resources available. And I brought it up. I said, Ms. Jenner, I don't fault you for trying to protect your family, but it just struck me the level of police protection that she was getting was incredible, And I just said, is everything in this country for sale, including police protection? And people were like, yeah. So that was kind of depressing. That's what struck out. But the deposition itself was fairly standard.
And is there anything about the DNC lawsuit you can tell us about, particularly the political promise argument that the DNC has tried to argue against the lawsuit?
I'm not sure. I wasn't there, so I wouldn't. I'd have to read the transcript. The transcript is going to be available on Friday, I think. And I'm sorry that I talked about the Jenner situation. I was told that Mike Sainato wanted me to talk about that case.
That's all right. It's interesting, and it is.
It's not like I want to talk about the Kardashians, but people keep asking me about it. That's why I talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll talk about it if people don't want to hear about it.
No, it's. It's interesting that that's going on, and I just ask you about that just to give people a sense that you guys are, doing a lot of different things and handling a lot of different high-profile cases. So,
somebody just asked about the transcript. The transcript will be unredacted. It will be a full transcript of the hearing. We will, when I get it, I will make it available to the public. So by reading it, it will be the closest thing to being there. And we also hired cameras and cell phones were not allowed in the courthouse. So we also hired a courtroom sketch artist. So that's going to come out. So that's what we're doing for all the folks who are not able to be there. So we'll be publicizing the renditions that the courtroom sketch artist made and the transcript. So just hang on tight, people. That's coming.
And that transcript will, give, supporters an insight into how the DNC really feels about Sanders supporters, because, given this, they're facing this lawsuit, they're not going to be, they're not in a position to hold back. So, but, with that said, Elizabeth, I want to thank you for coming on, and I thank you for, what you're doing, because, I'm sure there's a lot of work involved in this, and it's not something that, you guys are obviously, making money off of, and you're, putting yourselves out there to be able to do this. It's not, a popular thing to go against the Democratic Party at all. So.
I think it's very popular. I mean, just so many people are supporting us on in this lawsuit. So as far as I'm concerned, as a lawyer, it's like a dream case, because as a lawyer, you want people to to support, it's at the end of the day, it's not my case. It's the client's case. I'm just giving advice.
It's all our cases.
It's your case. So I'm just giving you all advice, so it makes me very happy.
And just one last question before we went. And since this is a class action lawsuit, I mean, is the most ideal outcome is that getting those donations returned to the individuals who donated to Bernie's campaign, or what would be the ideal outcome of this case?
The ideal outcome of this case is to go to trial and win.
And what would that victory? What would come with that win?
One of the claims that we are one of the relief that we are seeking is damages. So that would be all the donations that people have made based on the representation by the DNC that their primaries are fair and impartial. In writing, they made that representation in writing.
Well, we all know that it was far from that, so I, hope that the court sees it that way as well. But Elizabeth will be looking out for that transcript on Friday, and I thank you again, and thank Jared for me, and thank everyone for tuning in, and I'll be back next week.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.